Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something pretty ambitious. We're taking a nearly 300-page doctoral thesis by Vilson Martin's Filho, and we're going to distill it into a 5-minute guide on how to unlock real, meaningful innovation in the classroom.
You know, we live in this world of constant connection, right? But the research we're diving into today asks a really critical question. Have our classrooms actually kept up? Are we trying to teach a generation that thinks and lives digitally using tools and methods from an analog age? And this gets us right to the core problem the research identifies. There's this fundamental gap in how we're approaching education. It's not just about one piece of tech or a single teaching method. It's a much bigger, more systemic disconnect. A lot of this gap really comes down to two different mindsets. So on one hand, you have our students, the digital natives. They've grown up in this fast-paced, multi-sensory world of hypermedia. But on the other hand, many of our educators are digital immigrants, shaped by a world that was a bit more linear. The research argues this difference creates a kind of natural friction in the classroom. But, and this is so important, the research is crystal clear. This isn't about blaming teachers. Not at all. The real issue is a systemic one. It's a gap between the way knowledge is created today, collaboratively, networked, and the way our classrooms are often structured. The big takeaway here is that we have to fix the system, not point fingers. So if that's the problem, how do we actually bridge this gap? Well, the thesis doesn't just diagnose the issue. It gives us a really powerful 3-part framework for creating real, lasting change in how we teach. I want you to think of it like a 3-legged stool. For innovation to be stable, to actually work, you need all 3 legs. You can't have one missing. First, there's the institution's context. That's the school. Second, the teacher's anchors, their own personal skills and beliefs. And third, the reasoning, the actual method used to create the lesson. Let's just break that down real quick. The context is the what. You know, the school's technology, its resources. The anchors are the who, the teacher with their unique skills and their mindset. And then the engine that drives the whole thing is the reasoning, the how. How do you actually design these learning experiences? And this right here is where the research gets super fascinating. The argument is, to really innovate, educators have to change not just what they teach, but how they think about building a lesson in the first place. It's a shift from just delivering information to actually designing learning experiences. This new way of thinking is powered by something called abductive reasoning. Now, that sounds academic, but it's actually pretty simple. It's not about proving something is true or must be true. Abductive reasoning is the logic of exploring what might be. It's that creative leap, that aha moment when you form a new idea to explain something. It's basically the engine of design. So to make this big idea actually useful for teachers, the thesis developed a practical tool. It's called the abductive taxonomy model, or MTA. And you can think of it as a playbook, a kind of roadmap for designing lessons using that creative what might be mindset. And here's basically how it works. It's pretty brilliant, actually. The MTA takes the creative phases from the world of design thinking and it maps them directly to concrete actions a teacher can take. It guides them all the way from just discovering and experimenting with an idea to eventually creating something completely new.
But, theory is one thing. The real test is, does a model like this actually work in a real-world classroom? Well, to find out, the researchers put it to the test with an experiment that involved 2 very different schools.
So the study compared 2 places. We'll just call them Institution A and Institution B. Now, Institution B was the tech-rich school. It had all the latest gadgets, amazing infrastructure. Institution A, on the other hand, was way less advanced with its tech. So you'd think Institution B would be the innovation powerhouse here, right?
But check this out. When you look at the results for the final, most complex part of the model, the part about actually creating new knowledge, Institution A, the school with less technology, actually outperformed the tech-rich Institution B.
How is that even possible? I mean, if it wasn't about the expensive tech, what was the real difference maker? Well, it turns out the answer wasn't in the hardware at all. It was in the humans.
A teacher from that so-called underdog school, Institution A, explained it perfectly. They talked about creating an experience that motivated action and said that only happens when a teacher feels both challenged and supported to get out of their comfort zone. In other words,
Innovation was about the culture, not just the tools.
And that surprising result led the researcher to a final, critical insight. It wasn't just about having a great process. There was something else, a secret ingredient that was missing. And this led to a refinement of the entire model.
So the model got a crucial update. That final stage couldn't just be to create. A second, equally important action was added, acompañar, which in English means to accompany or to support. The insight was profound. Creating isn't enough. We have to support each other while we do it. And this leads us to the single biggest takeaway from this entire study. Real innovation isn't a process you can just buy or a technology you can install. It is a deeply human, collective activity. It can only thrive in a culture where people feel safe enough to experiment, to fail, and to create together.
And uncovering this truth was no small thing. The researcher invested an incredible 2,400 hours just on the practical fieldwork and data analysis for this study. That's a huge testament to the effort it takes to understand these complex human dynamics.
So in the end, it all comes back to the people. Just like the author himself concludes, the success of any tool or any model really depends on the vision of the teachers using it and, crucially, the environment that empowers them.
And that leaves us with one final provocative thought to chew on. As we design the classrooms of tomorrow, are we setting up our educators for a solo performance, where they're expected to somehow innovate all by themselves? Or are we finally ready to treat teaching like the collaborative, supportive team sport it truly needs to be?